Everyone admired the businessman's perfect family until his young son grabbed the wedding mic. His first words made the room go deadly silent. Marcus stood in front of the full-length mirror, his small hands trembling as he adjusted the blue silk tie of his wedding suit. The 6-year-old's reflection showed perfectly pressed pants, a crisp white shirt, and a tailored jacket that probably cost more than most people's entire wardrobes. His blue-tipped hair, usually wild and free, had been meticulously styled to match his father's vision of the perfect son. "Stop fidgeting," his father's voice cut through the air like a whip. "Remember what we discussed?" Marcus's hands dropped to his sides immediately. He watched in the mirror as his father approached, each step echoing against the marble floor of the wedding venue's preparation room. Richard Maxwell stood tall in his black tuxedo, every inch the successful businessman everyone thought him to be. "Yes, sir," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. Richard grabbed Marcus's shoulder, fingers digging in just enough to hurt without leaving marks. "I can't hear you." "Yes, sir," Marcus repeated louder, forcing his voice not to shake. "Better?" Richard's grip loosened. "Now, what are the rules for today?" Marcus recited them mechanically, just as he'd practiced. "Smile at all times. Stand straight. Don't speak unless spoken to. Say only nice things about our family. And Marcus swallowed hard. "Never talk about the attic." Richard's face broke into a wide smile, the one he used for business meetings and social gatherings. "Perfect. Today is about our family becoming complete. Sarah will be your new mother, and nothing will ruin this day. Understood?" "Yes, sir." The door opened, and Sarah's wedding coordinator poked her head in. "Mr. Maxwell? The first guests are arriving." "Excellent." Richard straightened his already perfect tie. "Come along, Marcus. Remember to smile." Marcus followed his father into the main hall of the venue, where crystal chandeliers cast rainbow reflections across cream-colored walls. Flowers in white and gold decorated every surface, filling the air with a sweet scent that made Marcus's nose itch. The guests began trickling in, each one stopping to admire the perfect family. Marcus stood beside his father, practicing his rehearsed smile as adults cooed over him. Such a handsome young man, the spitting image of his father. What a blessing, taking on single parenthood after losing your wife. And now, finally a complete family again. Marcus felt his chest tighten with each comment. 2 years had passed since his mother's funeral, but the memories still burned fresh. The black clothes, the whispers, the way his father's hand had gripped his shoulder just like today, warning him to keep quiet about the changes that had already begun at home. Mrs. Thompson, his first-grade teacher, arrived with her husband. Her eyes lingered on Marcus longer than the others, and he saw the same concern he'd noticed when she'd asked about his absences from school. She'd been the only one to question why a stellar student suddenly started missing days without explanation. "Marcus," she said softly, kneeling to his level. "How are you doing, sweetheart?" Before he could answer, Richard's hand found his shoulder again. "He's excited about the wedding, aren't you, son? Though he's been a bit under the weather lately, hence the missed school days. But we're all better now, right, champ?" Marcus nodded, the practiced smile never wavering. Mrs. Thompson's frown deepened, but she said nothing more as her husband guided her away. The next hour passed in a blur of faces and forced smiles. Marcus's cheeks hurt from maintaining his expression, and his mind kept drifting to the attic at home. The dark space with its single window, the way the floorboards creaked under his feet, the sound of the lock clicking shut from the outside. "Marcus?" A gentle voice broke through his thoughts. Sarah stood before him in her wedding dress, looking like the princesses in the books his mother used to read him. "Would you like to help me check on the flower arrangements?" For a moment, hope flickered in Marcus's chest. Sarah had always been kind to him during the year she'd dated his father. Sometimes, when Richard wasn't around, she'd even let Marcus play with her phone or brought him small treats. "That's not necessary," Richard interrupted smoothly. "Marcus needs to practice his lines for the speech." Sarah's smile faltered slightly. "Oh, of course. I just thought. We have a schedule to maintain," Richard said firmly. "Marcus, go with Mr. Chin to review your part." Marcus watched Sarah walk away, her white dress trailing behind her like a cloud. He followed the wedding coordinator to a small side room, his feet feeling heavier with each step. The speech, his father's idea of showing off their perfect family dynamic, sat like a stone in his stomach. Mr. Chen handed him the microphone for practice. Remember, you'll speak right after your father's toast. Just 3 sentences about welcoming Sarah to the family. Think you can handle that, buddy? Marcus stared at the microphone, remembering the attic, the darkness, the loneliness. His father's warnings echoed in his head, but another voice, one that sounded like his mother's, whispered that maybe, just maybe, today was his chance. He gripped the microphone tighter, his small knuckles turning white. In a few hours, he would stand before everyone with this same microphone. In a few hours, he would have to make a choice between his father's rules and the truth that burned in his throat every time he swallowed it back. A loud laugh filtered through the door. His father's public laugh, the one that sounded nothing like the low, dangerous chuckle that came before attic time. Marcus closed his eyes, trying to steady his breathing like his school counselor had taught him. "You okay, kid?" Mr. Chen asked, noticing his distress. Marcus nodded, but his mind was already racing ahead to the moment he would stand before all those people. Would they believe him? Would they see past his father's perfect facade? Would anyone help him if he told the truth? The microphone trembled in his hands as he practiced his assigned lines, each word tasting like ash in his mouth. Outside, the wedding guests continued to arrive, their happy chatter a stark contrast to the storm building inside him. In a few hours, everything would change. He just didn't know yet if it would be for better or worse. The memory of that morning hit Marcus as he clutched the practice microphone. It had started like any other day at the Maxwell house, with silence. Marcus had woken at exactly 6:30 a.m., his body trained to rise before his father's footsteps could thunder down the hall. The boy had slipped from his bed, carefully avoiding the squeaky floorboard by his door. One wrong sound could set the tone for the entire day. "You're 3 minutes late," Richard had said when Marcus entered the kitchen, not looking up from his phone. "Get your breakfast." Marcus had reached for the cereal box with shaking hands. "Sorry, sir. Sorry doesn't fix tardiness." Richard's eyes finally lifted, cold and calculating. "Perhaps you need another reminder about punctuality?" Marcus's heart had jumped to his throat. "No, sir. Please. I'll do better. We'll discuss it after the wedding." Richard's voice had carried that dangerous softness. "Wouldn't want you to have red eyes in the photos, would we?" The cereal had turned to sawdust in Marcus's mouth. He'd forced himself to eat, knowing skipping breakfast would only make things worse. Now, hours later in the wedding venue, Mr. Chen's voice pulled Marcus back to the present. "Let's try the speech one more time." Before Marcus could respond, the door burst open. Richard stood there, his pleasant mask firmly in place for any watching guests. "Change of plans," he announced. "Marcus needs to greet some special guests. Mr. Chun will resume practice in 30 minutes. Marcus followed his father through the venue's ornate hallways, past clusters of chattering guests. They stopped near a quiet alcove where Richard's grip tightened on his son's shoulder. "Your teacher, Mrs. Thompson, is asking too many questions," Richard hissed. "What have you been telling her?" "Nothing, sir," Marcus whispered. "I promise. You better be telling the truth." Richard's fingers dug deeper. "Remember what happened last time you tried to get attention from teachers?" Marcus remembered. 3 days in the attic, no dinner, only bathroom breaks when his father remembered. "Yes, sir. Good boy." Richard's grip relaxed. "Now, go stand with Sarah's daughter. Look happy. Look normal." Marcus walked toward Emma, Sarah's 12-year-old daughter, who stood by the dessert table in a pink bridesmaid dress. She smiled as he approached. "Hey, Squirt," Emma said, sneaking him a cookie. "You look like you're about to throw up." Marcus took the cookie, but didn't eat it. "I'm fine. You right?" Emma glanced around before lowering her voice. "Mom's worried about you, you know. She keeps telling me to be extra nice to my new little brother." Marcus's stomach churned. He'd seen Sarah watching him with concern, especially after the dinner 2 weeks ago when his father had dragged him away from the table for spilling his water. "Your mom's nice," he managed to say. "Yes, she is." Emma frowned. "Which is why I don't get why she's marrying your D." "Marcus." Richard's voice boomed across the room. Come here. Mister. Harrison wants to see you. Marcus hurried over to where his father stood with several business associates. Mr. Harrison, Richard's partner at the firm, beamed down at him. There's our young man. Harrison clapped Marcus on the back, making him flinch. Richard here says you're top of your class. Yes, sir, Marcus replied automatically. Though we've had some attendance issues lately, Richard added, his smile never reaching his eyes. Have a wee son? Marcus felt cold sweat on his neck. I was sick. Poor thing, one of the women in the group cooed. But he looks much better now. Amazing what proper discipline can do, Richard said, squeezing Marcus's shoulder. Structure is everything in raising children. The adults nodded in agreement, none of them noticing how Marcus's face had gone pale. None of them knew that structure meant locked doors and dark attics and missed meals. The morning dragged on with more introductions, more forced smiles, more pretending. Marcus's jaw ached from holding his expression, and his stomach churned with each passing hour that brought him closer to the speech. During a brief moment alone, he slipped into the bathroom and splashed water on his face. The cool liquid helped clear his head, but when he looked in the mirror, he saw his mother's eyes staring back at him. I miss you, Mom, he whispered to his reflection. The door creaked open, and Marcus quickly dried his face. Mrs. Thompson stepped in, then stopped short. Oh, Marcus, I'm sorry. I thought this was the ladies' room. She turned to leave, but hesitated. Honey, are you okay? You don't look well. Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it. His father's warnings rang in his ears, but Mrs. Thompson's kind eyes made him want to tell her everything. He started. The bathroom door swung open again. Richard stood there, his shadow filling the doorway. There you are? His voice was pleasant, but Marcus saw the tension in his jaw. Mrs. Thompson, I believe the ladies' room is down the hall to the left. Of course. She looked between father and son. We need to practice the speech, Richard interrupted. Big moment coming up soon. Right, Marcus? Marcus nodded, his throat too tight for words. Mrs. Thompson left reluctantly, and Richard's hand clamped on Marcus's shoulder. What did I say about talking to teachers? He growled once they were alone. I wasn't. We'll discuss this tonight. Richard straightened Marcus's tie roughly. After our perfect wedding. After you give your perfect speech. After you prove you can follow simple instructions. Marcus thought of the attic waiting at home, of the long hours in the dark, of the spiders that crawled across his legs when he couldn't move. Please, he whispered. I'll be good. You better be. Richard checked his watch. 1 hour until the ceremony. If you ruin this day, for Sarah. He left the threat hanging. Marcus watched his father leave, then bent over the sink and threw up the breakfast he'd forced down that morning. As he rinsed his mouth, he heard the wedding march beginning to play in the main hall. 1 hour. In 1 hour, he would stand before everyone with a microphone in his hand. 1 hour to decide between his father's rules and the truth that burned inside him. In the mirror, his mother's eyes stared back, seeming to ask, when will you speak up? The wedding ceremony passed in a blur of white tulle and polite applause. Marcus stood perfectly still beside his father, clutching the rings on their small velvet cushion, focusing on breathing. Just breathing. Dearly beloved, the officiant's voice echoed through the hall. Marcus watched as Sarah smiled at his father, her eyes full of hope and love. She didn't know. How could she know? His mind drifted to that morning's final warning, delivered in the privacy of their home before they left for the venue. Remember, son, Richard had said, straightening Marcus's tie with hands that could turn cruel in an instant. After I give my speech about our perfect family, you'll stand up and welcome Sarah properly. 3 sentences, not 1 word more. Or, his eyes had drifted upward toward the attic. Now, standing in the wedding hall, Marcus felt the weight of those unspoken threats pressing down on his chest. The ceremony continued around him, vows exchanged, rings presented, kisses shared. The guests dabbed at their eyes, moved by the beautiful union of a successful businessman and his lovely bride. What a touching ceremony, one guest whispered nearby. And that little boy, another replied. So well-behaved? Well-behaved. The words made Marcus's stomach turn. He'd heard them before, from teachers, neighbors, his father's friends. Such a well-behaved child. They didn't know that well-behaved meant silent, meant scared, meant surviving. The ceremony ended, and the guests moved to the reception hall. Marcus followed the crowd, Emma falling into step beside him. "Hey," she nudged him gently. "You look like you're going to pass out." "I'm fine," he said automatically. Emma frowned. "You know, after the speeches, Mom said we could get ice cream. Maybe you can tell me why you're really so scared then." Before Marcus could respond, Richard appeared, guiding them to the main table. "Places everyone. Marcus, remember your position." The reception hall buzzed with conversation and the clinking of glasses. Waiters glided between tables with champagne for the adults and sparkling cider for the children. Marcus stared at his untouched plate as his father stood, tapping his glass for attention. "Friends, family," Richard began, his public voice warm and engaging. "Today is a celebration of love, of family, of new beginnings." Marcus's hands twisted in his lap as his father spoke about family values, about the blessing of finding love again, about the joy of giving Marcus a new mother. Each word felt like a lie, heavy and suffocating. "And now," Richard concluded, "my son would like to say a few words about welcoming Sarah into our family." The microphone appeared before Marcus. "Mr. Chin smiled encouragingly as he handed it over. Marcus stood on shaking legs, feeling every eye in the room turn to him. His father's stare burned into the side of his face. 3 sentences. That's all he had to say. 3 simple, practice sentences about family and love and new beginnings. But as he lifted the microphone, different words pressed against his teeth. Words about darkness and locked doors and long hours alone. Words about missed meals and silent tears and spiders crawling across his skin. The room waited. His father's fingers drummed once on the table, a warning. Marcus opened his mouth, and time seemed to slow. He saw Mrs. Thompson at her table, her concerned eyes fixed on him. Saw Emma, watching curiously. Saw Sarah, smiling encouragingly, not knowing she was about to marry a monster. Saw his mother's face, reflected in the water glass before him, asking, "When will you speak up?" His father cleared his throat, another warning. Marcus knew what would happen if he deviated from the script. Knew the attic waited at home. Knew the darkness and the silence and the hunger. But he also knew, with sudden clarity, that he couldn't stay silent anymore. His voice cracked. He swallowed hard and tried again. "I have something to say about my father." Richard's hand moved toward him, but Marcus stepped back, gripping the microphone tighter. "My father." The words stuck in his throat. The room had gone completely silent. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. "Son," Richard's voice carried that dangerous softness. "Remember what we practiced?" Marcus looked at Sarah, at her kind face now creased with concern. "My father locks me in the attic." The words fell into the silence like stones into still water. Someone gasped. A glass shattered somewhere. "When I make mistakes," Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger, "or when I'm too slow getting ready, or when I talk to teachers." He saw Mrs. Thompson's hand fly to her mouth. "He locks me up there, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days." "Marcus?" Richard stood, his face a mask of forced concern. "Son, what an imagination you have." "I'm so sorry, everyone. He's been watching too many." "There's a blanket up there," Marcus pressed on, stepping further away from his father's reaching hand. "And a bucket for when I need to, when I can't hold it anymore." "And spiders. So many spiders." The room erupted in whispers. Sarah had gone pale, one hand gripping the table's edge. "I'm not lying." Marcus's voice rose, years of silence finally breaking. "I can show you the scratches on the door where I try to get out. I can show you the bucket. I can show you." Richard lunged forward, but the wedding photographer stepped between them, her camera raised like a shield. "Don't touch him," she said firmly. Marcus saw Sarah reach for her purse, saw her fingers trembling as she pulled out her phone, saw her slide it beneath the table, dialing without looking. "He's clearly confused," Richard said loudly, his charm cracking at the edges. "Making up stories for attention." Marcus, that's enough now. Last week, Marcus continued, tears finally falling. I spilled my milk at breakfast. He locked me up there for 2 days. No food. Just water from an old bottle. I heard you, Sarah, when you came over. I heard you ask where I was. He said I was at a friend's house. But I was up there, trying not to make any noise, I said, that's enough. Richard's voice boomed across the hall, his mask finally slipping completely. Several guests stood. The wedding photographer kept her position between father and son. Emma had moved to her mother's side, both of them staring at Richard with horror. The attic door has 3 locks, Marcus said, his voice small but clear in the shocked silence. He checks them twice before he leaves. And sometimes, when he's really angry, he turns off the light in the hallway, so it's completely dark up there. And I sit in the corner and try to remember what Mom used to say about being brave, and I wait and wait and wait. Sarah stood abruptly, her wedding dress rustling. I've heard noises, she said, her voice shaking. From upstairs. When you said Marcus was at friends, houses, or study groups. I thought I heard. Don't be ridiculous, Richard snapped, but his eyes darted toward the exits. The police are on their way, Sarah announced, holding up her phone. And I think, Richard, you should stay right where you are. The room exploded into movement. Security guards appeared at the doors. Guests stood, phones out, some recording, some calling authorities. Mrs. Thompson had made her way to Marcus, placing a protective hand on his shoulder. Richard's face contorted with rage, all pretense gone. You ungrateful little. Step back, sir, the photographer warned, her camera still raised. Don't make this worse. Marcus heard sirens in the distance, growing closer. The microphone slipped from his fingers, clattering on the table. The sound of truth echoing through the reception hall, impossible to take back. The weight of silence lifted from his shoulders, replaced by something that felt almost like hope. The silence that followed Marcus's words lasted only seconds, but it felt like years. Then, like a dam breaking, the wedding reception erupted into chaos. Oh my God, a woman gasped. The Harrisons' dinner party last month. Richard said Marcus was sick with the flu. He was limping at school the next week, Mrs. Thompson added, her hand still protective on Marcus's shoulder. Said he'd fallen down the stairs. Richard's face had turned an ugly shade of red. This is ridiculous. My son clearly needs professional help, making up these wild stories. The scratches. Emma suddenly interrupted, her voice cutting through the noise. Mom, remember when we first visited their house? Up by the attic door? You asked about them, and he said, the previous owners had a large dog, Sarah whispered, her wedding dress suddenly seeming too bright, too pristine for the darkness unfolding around her. That's what you told me, Richard. But those scratches. She turned to Marcus, her eyes filling with tears. They were from the inside, weren't they? Marcus nodded, his small frame trembling. Sometimes my nails would break when I tried to get out. The admission sent another wave of gasps through the crowd. Someone retched in the corner. Mrs. Thompson's grip on Marcus's shoulder tightened. I have photos, the wedding photographer announced suddenly, her professional camera still positioned between Richard and his son. Not of the attic, but of Marcus over the past few months, during the engagement shoots. The bruises, the way he flinched. I documented everything. I was planning to report it after the wedding, but you had no right, Richard snarled, taking a step forward. Those are private family photos. Stay back, the photographer warned, her voice steady. The police are already on their way. Sarah called them. Richard's head snapped toward his bride. Sarah held up her phone, her other hand clutching Emma close. They'll be here in minutes. You called the police? Richard's voice dropped to that dangerous whisper Marcus knew too well. At our wedding? After everything I've done for you? Done for me? Sarah's voice shook with rage. Like lying about where your son was when I heard crying from upstairs? Like making excuses for every bruise, every absence, every time he couldn't sit properly at dinner. The crowd had formed a loose circle around them, phones recording, faces horrified. Marcus saw Mr. Harrison push through the crowd, his usual jovial expression replaced by something hard and cold. The sounds from your office, Harrison said slowly. During lunch meetings, I thought, I convinced myself it was the heating system. You're all being ridiculous. Richard tried to laugh, but it came out strangled. Marcus has always been troubled, ever since his mother. Don't. Marcus's voice cut through the air, suddenly stronger. Don't talk about Mom. She'd be ashamed of you. Richard spat. Making up lies, ruining my wedding. No, Marcus stepped forward, Mrs. Thompson, moving with him. Mom would be ashamed of you. She'd be ashamed of what you did to me after she died. She'd be ashamed of the attic. A sound of sirens grew closer. Richard's eyes darted to the exits again, but security guards stood firmly at each door. The attic, Sarah said suddenly. Tell them about last week, Marcus. When I came over for dinner, Marcus swallowed hard. I spilled my juice, just a little on the tablecloth. After you left, he looked at his father, years of fear giving way to something else, anger. After you left, he dragged me upstairs. Said I'd embarrassed him in front of his new family. Said I needed to learn my lesson. 2 days, Sarah continued, her voice hollow. When I called to check on him, you said he was at a school camping trip. But there was no camping trip, was there? I heard you. Marcus's voice cracked. Through the floor, asking where I was. I wanted to scream, but... He looked at his father. Last time I screamed, it was 3 days instead of 1. The police sirens were deafening now, red and blue lights flashing through the reception hall's windows. Richard suddenly lunged forward, his mask completely shattered. You ungrateful little brat. Several things happened at once. The photographer stepped fully in front of Marcus. Mr. Harrison and 2 other men grabbed Richard's arms. Sarah screamed, and through the main doors burst 4 police officers, weapons drawn. Hands where we can see them. The next few minutes dissolved into controlled chaos. Richard was handcuffed, still shouting about ungrateful children and lies. The guests were corralled to one side of the room, giving statements to officers. Sarah sat with Emma, both crying quietly. Marcus found himself in a quiet corner with a female detective who knelt to his level, her eyes kind but professional. Can you tell me more about the attic, Marcus? So he did. He told her about the locks, 3 of them, each with a different key. About the single window, too small to climb through, that let in just enough light to see the spiders. About the bucket in the corner that he had to use when his father forgot about bathroom breaks. Sometimes, he whispered, I'd hear parties downstairs, people laughing, and I'd bang on the floor, just a little, hoping someone would hear. But the music was always too loud. The detective wrote everything down, her pen moving steadily even as her knuckles whitened around it. He has cameras, Marcus added suddenly. In the hallway, pointing at the attic door. To make sure I don't try to get out. Cameras? The detective looked up sharply. In case I learned to pick the locks. He said bad boys who try to escape get worse punishments. More officers arrived. Child services representatives appeared. Someone brought Marcus a shock blanket, though he wasn't cold. He watched as his father was let out in handcuffs, still protesting his innocence. A child's imagination, Richard was saying to anyone who would listen. He needs help, psychiatric help. What he needs, Sarah's voice rang out, clear and cold, is for you to never touch him again. The wedding cake sat forgotten on its table, white frosting gleaming under the crystal chandeliers. Flowers that had been arranged to celebrate love now witnessed its opposite. And in the middle of it all, a small boy in a blue suit finally felt the weight of silence lift from his shoulders. Mrs. Thompson appeared with a glass of water. Small sips, she said softly, helping him hold the glass. You're safe now. You're so brave, Marcus. So incredibly brave. The detective cleared her throat gently. We'll need to document everything. The attic, the locks, the cameras. Is there anything else you want to tell me about, Marcus? Marcus looked around the room, at Sarah holding Emma, both of them watching him with tear-stained faces. At the photographer downloading her evidence photos for the police. At the guests who had come for a wedding and witnessed a rescue instead. Just one thing, he said quietly. Can someone check for the spiders? When you look at the attic, I don't want them to be locked up there too. The detective's pen paused, just for a moment. We'll check for everything, Marcus. I promise. Outside, more police cars arrived. Inside, the truth continued to spread through the ruined reception, one horrified whisper at a time. And somewhere between the chaos and the comfort, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in 2 years: freedom. The wedding venue's bridal suite had been transformed into a makeshift interview room. Marcus sat on a plush white couch, his blue suit jacket discarded, tie loosened. A social worker named M.S. Chun, no relation to the wedding coordinator, sat across from him with a tablet. "Would you like some water?" she asked, her voice gentle. "Or maybe something to eat?" Marcus shook his head. His stomach felt too tight for food, though he couldn't remember his last real meal. The detective from earlier, who had introduced herself as Detective Torres, stood by the door, speaking quietly into her radio. "Units at the residence confirm presence of surveillance equipment," she was saying. "Multiple cameras focused on the attic door. Request forensics team for Marcus?" MS. Chen's voice pulled his attention back. "Can you tell me when this started? The attic punishment?" Marcus twisted his hands in his lap. "After Mom died, 2 years ago. And before that? How did your father treat you when your mother was alive?" "He was—" Marcus searched for the words. "Different." He smiled more. Real smiles, not the scary ones. A knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah stood there, her wedding dress wrinkled, makeup streaked with tears. Emma hovered behind her. "The police need me to give a statement," Sarah said softly. "But I wanted to check on you first, Marcus." Marcus looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the guilt swimming in her eyes. "It's not your fault," he said suddenly. "You didn't know." Sarah's face crumpled. "I should have known. The signs were all there. The sounds from upstairs, the way you flinched when he moved too quickly, the unexplained absences." She pressed a hand to her mouth. "God, I'm so sorry, Marcus." "Mrs. Maxwell," Detective Torres began. "Don't," Sarah cut her off. "Don't call me that. I'm not. I can't." She took a deep breath. "My name is Sarah Collins. I won't be taking his name. Not now, not ever." Emma stepped forward. "Can I sit with Marcus while you talk to the police?" The adults exchanged glances. Then MS. Chun nodded. Emma crossed the room and perched on the couch beside Marcus, careful to leave space between them. The security team caught him trying to leave through the kitchen. She said quietly as Sarah left with Detective Torres. "Your dad, I mean." One of the waiters tackled him. Marcus didn't respond. He was thinking about the cameras in his house, wondering if they were still recording an empty attic. More police cars kept showing up, Emma continued. And news vans too. "Mom made them stay outside, but people are talking about what he did to you." "Marcus, mess." Chun interjected gently. "Can you tell me about the last time your father put you in the attic?" "Before today." The memories rushed back. The spilled juice, the grip on his arm too tight, the stares that seemed to go on forever. "Last week. Tuesday." "And how long were you there?" 2 days. Marcus's voice grew smaller. He forgot about dinner the first night. And breakfast. When he finally let me out, I was so hungry I threw up. Emma made a choked sound beside him. MS. Chin's tablet pen moved steadily across the screen. "Did you ever try to tell anyone?" "Before today." Marcus nodded slowly. "Once. My old teacher, Mr. Brooks. I tried to show him the bruises from where Dad grabbed me. But Dad found out. Said teachers who asked too many questions would get me in trouble." He swallowed hard. "I was in the attic for 3 days that time." The door opened again. Mrs. Thompson stepped in, carrying a paper bag. "I got him some food. Just some crackers and juice. Nothing too heavy." "Thank you, MS." Chun said. "Marcus, would you like to try eating something now?" He took a cracker, more to be polite than from hunger. Mrs. Thompson sat in a nearby chair, her teacher's instincts clearly warring with her desire to comfort him. "The police are gathering evidence at your house," she said carefully. "Marcus, I need you to know how sorry I am. I knew something was wrong, but I never imagined—" "It's okay," Marcus said automatically, the same way he'd learned to say, "I'm fine," when people asked. "No, Mrs. Thompson's voice cracked. "It's not okay. None of this is okay." A commotion outside the door drew their attention. They could hear Sarah's voice, raised in anger. "What do you mean he's demanding to see his son? He has no right." He lost that right the moment he— Detective Torres's calmer tones cut in. "We're not letting him anywhere near Marcus. He's just trying to control the situation." Classic abuser tactic. Marcus's hands began to shake. Emma noticed, and after a moment's hesitation, took one of them in hers. "He can't hurt you anymore," she said firmly. "Mom and I won't let him." "Nobody will." MS. Chun set down her tablet. "Marcus, I need to talk to you about what happens next. Is that okay?" He nodded, still holding Emma's hand. "You'll need a safe place to stay while we sort everything out. Do you have any relatives nearby?" "My aunt," Marcus said suddenly. "Mom's sister. But Dad said she moved away after the funeral. We'll find her." MS. Chun promised. "In the meantime, we'll arrange emergency foster care with a certified family who he can stay with us," Emma blurted out. When the adults looked at her, she pressed on. "We have a guest room, and Mom already loves him, and he'll be safe, and Emma, Mrs. Thompson said gently, there are procedures that need to be followed. Legal requirements." The door opened once more. Sarah stood there, her face set in determined lines. "I've spoken with my lawyer. Given the circumstances and my existing relationship with Marcus, we can apply for emergency temporary guardianship while they locate his aunt." MS. Chun straightened. "That would need to be approved by Judge Martinez is already being contacted." Sarah cut in. "She's a family friend. Once she hears the evidence." She looked at Marcus. "Only if you want to, of course. We can find another arrangement if you'd prefer." Marcus looked at Emma, who squeezed his hand encouragingly. Then at Mrs. Thompson, who nodded slightly. At MS. Chun, whose professional mask couldn't quite hide her approval. "I'd like that," he whispered. The chaos outside the bridal suite continued. Police officers gathering statements, guests sharing stories of things they'd noticed but dismissed, reporters trying to get past security. But in this room, a new kind of family was forming from the ashes of a ruined wedding. "Your aunt," Sarah said softly. "What's her name?" "We'll find her." "Claire," Marcus replied. "Claire Patterson. She used to live in Portland before your father cut contact," Sarah finished grimly. "Detective Torres is already running a search." Marcus felt tears threatening again. But these were different from the ones he'd grown used to in the attic. These felt like relief. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice small but steady. "Now," Sarah knelt before him, careful not to crowd him, "we make sure you're safe. We find your aunt. We tell the truth, all of it, and we make sure your father never hurts you again." Outside, a news helicopter thrummed overhead. Inside, Marcus felt the last chains of silence finally break. The police car's lights painted the Victorian house in alternating red and blue. Marcus sat in the back of a police SUV with Detective Torres, watching as officers moved in and out of his former home. The mansion that had been his prison for 2 years suddenly looked smaller, less threatening. "You don't have to go in," Detective Torres said softly. "We can get your things later." But Marcus shook his head. "I want to show you everything." Sarah stood on the sidewalk with Emma, both changed out of their wedding clothes into borrowed sweats. MS. Chun waited beside them, her tablet ready. "Okay," Detective Torres nodded. "But we stop the moment you want to stop. Deal." "Deal." They approached the house together, Marcus between Detective Torres and Sarah, Emma trailing close behind with her mother's hand firmly in hers. 2 uniformed officers stood at the front door, nodding as they passed. The foyer lights were on, casting warm shadows that had always felt cold to Marcus. A forensics team worked methodically, photographing everything, dusting for prints. "The stairs," Marcus said quietly. His small hand pointed upward. He'd grabbed my arm there, where the carpet's thicker, so it wouldn't leave marks. Detective Torres spoke into her radio. "Need photos of the staircase carpet," focusing on where patterns. They climbed slowly, Marcus stopping at each significant spot. "That dent in the wall? From when I tried to hold on to the frame. Last month, I think." Sarah made a small sound behind him, but when he turned, her face was set in determined lines. At the top of the stairs, Marcus stopped. Down the hallway, partially hidden in shadow, loomed the attic door. 3 heavy locks gleamed in the forensics team's camera flashes. "The cameras," he whispered. Detective Torres followed his gaze to the small, dark lenses mounted in the ceiling corners. "We found the recording equipment in your father's study. Years of footage." He said it was to catch me if I tried to escape. Marcus's voice had gone flat, emotionless. But I never did. I was too scared. Emma moved closer, her shoulder just touching his. The simple contact seemed to ground him. Can you show us inside? Yes. Chin asked gently. Only if you're ready. Marcus took a deep breath and nodded. A forensics technician stepped forward with a ring of keys taken from Richard's office. The locks opened one by one, each click echoing in the hallway like gunshots. The door swung open with a creak that haunted Marcus's nightmares. Wait, he said suddenly. Everyone froze. The light. He always turned it off first. Detective Torres found the switch, flicking it off. The hallway plunged into darkness, broken only by flashlight beams. This is how it was, Marcus continued. In the dark. He'd push me in, and then the detective's flashlight illuminated the attic interior. Sarah gasped. Emma turned away. The space was small, made smaller by the slanting roof. A thin blanket lay crumpled in one corner, beside an overturned bucket. Spider webs decorated the rafters. And on the doors inside, clearly visible now, were countless scratch marks. Evidence team. Detective Torres spoke into her radio, her voice tight with controlled anger. Full documentation of the attic. Every mark, every spider web, the floor. Marcus interrupted. He pointed to a specific board. That's where I'd sit. You can see where. He trailed off. The forensics photographer moved closer, capturing images of the worn floorboard, smoothed by countless hours of a small boy shifting in fear. Over there, Marcus continued, finding strength in the documentation of his truth. That's where I hid the water bottles, when he'd leave me one. In that corner. That's where the spiders usually stayed. I named them sometimes, when I was alone too long. Sarah made a choke sound. Marcus, I'm so sorry. If I had known. The window, he pressed on, pointing to the tiny pane of glass near the roof peak. It was too small to climb through. I tried once. That's when he installed the cameras. Detective Torres's pen moved rapidly across her notepad. How often would he leave you up here? At least once a week. Sometimes more. Longest was... Marcus counted in his head. 5 days, I think, after I tried to tell Mr. Brooks. 5 days? Emma's voice cracked. Without food? He'd bring water sometimes. When he remembered, Marcus stared at the blanket in the corner. I learned to sleep sitting up. The floor's too cold to lie down. MS. Chin stepped forward. Marcus, we have enough for now. You don't have to. Yes, I do. His voice grew stronger. I have to show you everything. So he can't lie anymore. So nobody says I made it up. They spent the next hour documenting every detail. The hidden granola bar wrappers Marcus had stolen from the kitchen, preparing for long punishments. The marks on the wall where he'd tracked days. The spot where he'd written Mom in tiny letters with a broken pencil. In his bedroom, they found more evidence of Richard's control. Cameras hidden in air vents, a journal where Marcus had been forced to write lines confessing his bad behavior, a drawer of confiscated toys taken as punishment. The study, Marcus said finally. That's where he kept the tapes and the keys. Richard's study yielded a computer full of surveillance footage, a drawer of attic keys, and a notebook detailing every punishment, session dates, durations, reasons. Richard had documented his own cruelty with chilling precision. Got it, a tech called out, holding up a hard drive. Years of video footage, all properly dated and labeled. Detective Torres turned to Marcus. You've done more than enough. Want to get your things now? Marcus nodded tiredly. In his room, he filled a backpack with clothes while Emma helped him pick out a few precious possessions. A photo of his mother, a stuffed dragon hidden under his mattress, a book of stories his mother used to read him. Ready? Sarah asked from the doorway. Marcus took one last look around the room that had been his cell as much as the attic. Ready? They descended the stairs together, past the forensics teams still gathering evidence. Outside, the news vans had multiplied, held back by police tape. Camera flashes burst like lightning as they emerged. Head down, Detective Torres instructed, shielding Marcus with her body. Straight to the car. They made it to the SUV just as another police car pulled up. 2 officers emerged, escorting a familiar figure. Missing something, one called out. holding up an evidence bag containing a small tablet. Detective Torres took it, showing it to Marcus. Your father's personal tablet. Password protected. Any idea what we might find on it? Marcus stared at the device that had occupied so many of his father's evenings. The schedule, he said quietly. He kept a schedule. For the attic times. Sarah's hand found his shoulder, gentle, nothing like his father's grip. Let's go home, Marcus. Our home. As they drove away, Marcus watched his old house disappear in the rear window. The attic window gleamed in the emergency lights, but it held no more power over him. The spiders, he said suddenly. Did someone check on them? Detective Torres smiled slightly. Animal control is heading over. No one's getting locked up in that attic ever again. Marcus leaned back in his seat, exhausted but free. The truth had emerged. Every dark corner illuminated. Every secret exposed to the light. And in its wake came not more darkness, but the first glimpse of dawn. Sarah's house felt different from the Victorian mansion. Warmer, brighter. The spare bedroom where Marcus now sat had pale blue walls and windows without locks. Simple things that meant everything. The bathroom's right across the hall, Emma said, helping him arrange his few possessions. Mom's room is downstairs, and I'm next door if you need anything. Even at night. Especially at night. Marcus nodded, clutching his stuffed dragon. The clock on the bedside table read 9:47 p.m. Normally, he'd be in bed by now. His father's rules strict about schedules. But tonight, nobody was forcing him to sleep. Hungry? Sarah appeared in the doorway with a plate of grilled cheese. It's okay if you're not, but it's here if you want it. The sandwich wasn't perfectly cut into triangles like his father demanded. The edges were a little burnt. It looked wonderful. Thank you, he whispered, taking a small bite. Real food, after hours of shock and statements and evidence collection. Marcus? Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, careful to maintain distance. Detective Torres called. They found your Aunt Claire. The sandwich stopped halfway to his mouth. You did? Sarah nodded. She's in Seattle now. Never moved far. Your father just made you think she was gone? She paused. She's driving down tonight. She'll be here by morning. Tonight? Marcus's voice cracked. But it's so late. Wild horses couldn't keep her away. Sarah smiled softly. She's been looking for you, Marcus. Ever since the funeral. Your father blocked her number, returned her letters, told the school not to let her contact you. Emma sat cross-legged on the floor, looking up at Marcus. Is she nice? Your aunt? She. Marcus searched his memories. She used to make pancakes shaped like animals. And she had a garden. Mom said she could grow anything. He looked at Sarah. What happens when she gets here? That depends on what you want, Sarah said carefully. Legally, as your closest relative, she has priority for custody. But there are options. Joint custody, visitation arrangements. Whatever makes you feel safest. Marcus digested this along with his sandwich. Will I have to see him? My father? No, Sarah's voice turned firm. Absolutely not. Detective Torres said they have more than enough evidence. The videos alone. Well, you won't have to see him unless you choose to. A knock at the door made Marcus jump. But it was just MS. Chun, still in her work clothes despite the late hour. Sorry to interrupt, she said. But I have some papers for you to sign, Sarah. Emergency temporary guardianship until Claire arrives. And Marcus, Dr. Wilson can see you tomorrow at 10. She's an excellent child psychologist. Marcus stiffened at the word psychologist. His father had always threatened to send him to a head doctor if he didn't behave. She's really nice, Emma piped up. She helped me after my dad died. We just talked and drew pictures. Sometimes we played games. You don't have to decide now, Sarah added. But she's there if you want to talk. Marcus nodded, then yawned suddenly. The day's events were catching up to him. Time for bed, Sarah asked gently. Fear flickered across his face. Do I? Is the door? No locks, Sarah said firmly. Not ever. You can close it or leave it open, whatever makes you feel comfortable. And if you wake up and need anything, you come find one of us. Doesn't matter what time. Marcus looked at the door. Simple wood, no deadbolts or cameras. Can it stay open? Just a little? Of course. Sarah stood. Emma, time for you to get ready for bed too. But Mom, It's been a long day for everyone. Sarah's tone was gentle but firm. Marcus needs rest. Emma got up reluctantly. Remember, I'm right next door. Just knock on the wall if you need anything. Like this. She demonstrated 3 quick taps on the shared wall. After they left, Marcus changed into borrowed pajamas, Emma's old ones, soft from washing. He crawled into bed, the mattress nothing like the hard attic floor. Sleep wouldn't come. Every creak made him tense. The open door let in unfamiliar shadows. Finally, he knocked tentatively on the wall, 3 quick taps. Seconds later, Emma's answering knocks came. Then her voice through the wall. You okay? Yeah, he called softly. Just checking. I'm here, she replied. All night. Somehow that helped. Marcus curled around his dragon, listening to the normal sounds of a home at night. Sarah loading the dishwasher downstairs, Emma's music playing softly next door, a car passing on the street. He must have dozed off because suddenly it was dark and he was back in the attic. The locks clicked, the darkness pressed in, his father's voice growled about punishment. Marcus? Marcus, wake up! He jerked awake to find Emma in his doorway, Sarah right behind her. Light from the hall spilled in, chasing away the shadows. You were crying out, Emma explained. Bad dream? Marcus nodded, shaking. Sarah approached slowly, telegraphed her movements. Can I sit? She asked. When he nodded, she perched on the bed's edge. Want to talk about it? The attic, he managed. He can't hurt you anymore, Sarah said firmly. Want to see something? She pulled out her phone, pulling up a news website. The headline read, Prominent businessman held without bail. Years of abuse uncovered at failed wedding. See? He's in jail. And with the evidence they found, she paused. He's going to be there for a very long time. Emma had settled on the floor again, providing silent support. Marcus read the article, his heart slowing as the reality sank in. They believed me, he whispered. Everyone believes you, Sarah confirmed. And tomorrow, you'll see your aunt. And we'll figure out what comes next. Together. Marcus hesitated. Can I have some water? Of course. Emma jumped up. I'll get it. Slowly, Sarah called after her. We don't want spills. Marcus tensed at the word, remembering spilled juice and attic punishments. But Sarah just smiled. If anything spills, we clean it up. That's all. No punishments, no attics, no cameras. Just paper towels and maybe a changed shirt. Emma returned with water in a plastic cup. No risk of breaking. Marcus sipped slowly, the nightmare's grip loosening. Think you can sleep? Sarah asked. Maybe. He looked at the door. Can the hall light stay on? All night, Sarah promised. And remember, 3 taps if you need anything. As they left, Marcus settled back into bed. The hall light painted a gentle path across his floor, nothing like the attic's darkness. From next door came 3 soft taps. He tapped back, then closed his eyes. Tomorrow would bring his aunt and a doctor to talk to, and probably more questions from police. But tonight, in this room with its unlocked door and blue walls, he was safe. For the first time in 2 years, Marcus slept through the night. The morning sun streamed through uncurtained windows, waking Marcus gently. For a moment, he panicked. He was late, his father would be angry, before remembering where he was. Sarah's house. Safe. A knock at his open door made him look up. Emma stood there in cartoon pajamas, her hair a mess. Mom's making pancakes, she announced. Real ones, not the frozen kind. Aunt. She grinned. Your aunt's here? Marcus sat up so fast he got dizzy. She's here? Got in an hour ago. She's been crying and hugging Mom and looking at your baby pictures that she brought. And Emma stopped. Sorry. Too much? Dr. Wilson says I sometimes talk too fast when I'm excited. It's okay. Marcus slid out of bed, heart pounding. Does she? Is she? She's amazing, Emma said softly. And she's been looking for you forever. Downstairs, voices drifted from the kitchen. Sarah's gentle tones and another voice, familiar yet distant, like a song half remembered. Marcus hesitated at the top of the stairs. Emma held out her hand. Together? He took it, grateful for the anchor. They descended slowly, the voices growing clearer. The police called again this morning, Sarah was saying. They need Marcus to sign some papers. but it can wait until he's ready. Dr. Wilson said not to rush. Marcus. He froze on the last step. Claire stood in the kitchen doorway, looking exactly like he remembered. Warm brown eyes like his mother's, curly hair now streaked with gray, hands that used to sneak him cookies when his father wasn't looking. "Oh, sweetheart," she breathed. "Look at you." Marcus didn't remember moving, but suddenly he was in her arms, breathing in the familiar scent of garden soil and vanilla. She held him tight, but not constraining, nothing like his father's grip. "I looked for you," she whispered into his hair. "Every day. I hired detectives, called the schools, even drove by the house at night hoping to see you. But he made sure I couldn't find you. He said you moved away." Marcus mumbled into her shoulder. "To Europe. That you didn't want." "Never." Claire pulled back just enough to look at him, tears streaming down her face. "I would never abandon you. You're all I have left of your mother. My little sister's precious boy." Sarah cleared her throat softly. "Pancakes are ready. Blueberry, chocolate chip, or plain?" "Chocolate chip," Claire and Marcus said simultaneously, then laughed. The sound felt foreign in Marcus's throat, but good. They settled around the kitchen table. Marcus between Claire and Emma, Sarah serving pancakes shaped vaguely like animals. No one commented when Marcus took small bites, testing each mouthful like he'd learned to do with prison meals in the attic. "Detective Torres called," Sarah said as she sat down. "Richard's arraignment is this morning. They don't need you there, Marcus. The evidence speaks for itself." Claire's hand tightened on her fork. "The videos?" Sarah nodded grimly. "And the notebooks. He documented everything like some kind of monster," Emma supplied, then looked guilty. "Sorry. Dr. Wilson says name-calling isn't productive." "Sometimes," Claire said carefully, "accurate labels are necessary." "And what he did?" She turned to Marcus. "I saw the attic photos." "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry." Marcus pushed a piece of pancake around his plate. "Did you know? Before? What he was like?" Claire set down her fork. "I had suspicions, even when your mother was alive. The way he controlled everything, how she had to account for every minute, every dollar. But she loved him, or thought she did. And after she died, she swallowed hard. I knew something was wrong when he cut off all contact. But I never imagined." "The police found Mom's letters," Marcus said quietly. "In his study. The ones you sent me. He kept them all, but he never—" "I know, sweetie." Claire stroked his hair. "I know." The doorbell rang, making Marcus jump. Sarah squeezed his hand as she stood. "That'll be Dr. Wilson. Remember, you don't have to talk today if you're not ready." But Marcus straightened in his chair. I want to tell everything." Dr. Wilson turned out to be a tall black woman with kind eyes and a bright yellow scarf. She sat with Marcus in Sarah's living room while the others waited in the kitchen. "Emma tells me you like dragons," she said, nodding at the stuffed toy he still carried. "Mom gave him to me," Marcus replied. "Before." Dr. Wilson nodded. "What's his name?" "Smoke." Marcus hugged the dragon closer. "Because gray smoke means danger's coming. That's what Mom used to say. Smart mom." Dr. Wilson said softly. "Marcus, do you know why I'm here?" He nodded. "To help me talk about the attic. And him. Only if you want to. We can also draw, or play games, or just sit quietly. This is your time." Marcus thought about it. "Can I draw while I talk?" "Of course." Dr. Wilson pulled out a sketch pad and colored pencils. "Whatever makes you comfortable." For the next hour, Marcus drew as he spoke. The attic with its 3 locks, the cameras watching everything, the spiders he'd named to feel less alone. He drew his father's 2 faces, the public smile and the private snarl. Drew the stairs he'd been dragged up, the bucket in the corner, the tiny window too small for escape. "And this?" Dr. Wilson pointed to a small figure he'd drawn in the corner. "That's me," Marcus said, counting ceiling boards. There were 47. I counted them over and over when it was dark. That must have been very scary. Marcus's pencil stilled. Sometimes I'd pretend Mom was there. She'd tell me stories about dragons who saved themselves from towers. But then I'd remember she was gone, and it was just me, alone with the spiders. He started drawing again, harder now. Until yesterday, when I told everyone. That was very brave, Dr. Wilson said quietly. Marcus looked up. Was it? I ruined the wedding. Sarah's special day. Can I tell you a secret? Dr. Wilson leaned forward. Sarah called me this morning. She said yesterday wasn't ruined. It was the most important day of her life, because it was the day she could finally help you. Fresh tears spilled onto the drawing. Dr. Wilson handed him a tissue. Crying is okay, she said. Everything you're feeling is okay. A knock at the door made them both look up. Claire stood there. Sorry to interrupt, but Detective Torres is here. She says it's important. Marcus tensed, but Dr. Wilson smiled reassuringly. Want me to stay while you talk to her? He nodded. Detective Torres entered, still in her work suit from court. Hey, Marcus, she said, sitting across from them. I wanted you to hear this from me first. Your father's being held without bail. And with the evidence we found, she paused. He's agreed to plead guilty. No trial needed. You won't have to testify. The pencil snapped in Marcus's hand. He admitted it? The evidence left him no choice. The videos, the journals, the witness statements. He's looking at 15 to 20 years minimum. Marcus stared at his broken pencil. So he won't? He can't hurt you anymore, Detective Torres confirmed. Ever? Dr. Wilson watched Marcus carefully. How does that make you feel? Marcus looked at his drawing. The attic, the locks, the tiny window. With shaking hands, he tore it in half. Can I draw something else now? Of course. He picked up a new pencil and began again. This time, he drew Sarah's house with its unlocked doors. Drew Emma showing him how to make blanket forts. Drew Claire's smile and Dr. Wilson's yellow scarf. Drew himself, without the attic shadows, stepping into the light. 6 months passed like the turning of pages in a healing story. The Victorian mansion was sold, its attic sealed forever. Marcus moved into Claire's small house by the park, its walls painted in colors he chose himself, its doors permanently lockless. French toast or waffles? Claire called up the stairs one Saturday morning. Emma and Sarah are coming for brunch. Marcus rolled over in bed, watching sunlight dance across his ceiling. No cameras watched back. No spiders spun webs in corners. Just morning light and the smell of coffee drifting up from the kitchen. French toast, he called back, then added, please. He could do that now, raise his voice, make choices, express preferences. Dr. Wilson said it was progress. 6 months of twice-weekly sessions had taught him that his voice mattered, that his feelings were valid, that fear could be faced and overcome. The doorbell rang as he was pulling on jeans. Emma's voice carried upstairs. Marcus, come see what Mom got at the shelter. He hurried down to find Emma cradling a small gray kitten. Sarah stood behind her, holding a carrier and looking slightly apologetic. The shelter called about a rescue case, she explained to Claire. The kitten was locked in a basement. Emma thought, can we show him his new home? Emma interrupted, practically bouncing. Please? Marcus approached slowly. The kitten looked up at him with huge gold eyes, trembling slightly. She's scared, he said softly. She just needs to learn she's safe now, Emma replied. Like you did? Claire and Sarah exchanged glances over the children's heads. 6 months of healing had brought changes in Emma too. More empathy, less chatter, a fierce protectiveness toward her almost brother. What's her name? Marcus reached out, letting the kitten sniff his fingers. That's up to you, Sarah said. She's yours if you want her. Marcus looked up, startled. Mine? Dr. Wilson suggested it, Claire explained. A responsibility that's also a companion. But only if you feel ready. The kitten rubbed against Marcus's hand, purring. Shadow, he said suddenly. Because shadows aren't scary anymore. Emma set Shadow in his arms. The kitten curled up immediately, trusting. Perfect name, Emma declared. Now, can we show the cat tree we built? The kids disappeared upstairs, their voices mixing with tiny meows. Claire turned to Sarah. How was court yesterday? Sarah's face hardened slightly. Final sentencing. 20 years, no possibility of early release. The videos. She shook her head. The judge said she'd never seen such calculated cruelty. Did Marcus's victim impact statement? It sealed the deal. Sarah managed a smile. Dr. Wilson said, writing it was a breakthrough for him, facing his fears on paper first, then having it read in court. Richard's lawyers tried to paint it as childhood fantasy, but the evidence. Claire started plating French toast. Has he asked about his father? Since the letter? Not once. Sarah helped arrange fruit on the plates. Dr. Wilson says that's okay. He'll ask when he's ready, if he ever is. The letter had arrived 3 months ago. Richard's attempt at manipulation from prison. Marcus had stared at the envelope for a long time before asking Claire to burn it unread. Morning, Dr. Wilson's voice came from the front door, which Claire had left open for her. Their Saturday brunches had become tradition. Upstairs, laughter erupted, followed by Emma's voice. Shadow no. That's Marcus's dragon. Better check on them, Sarah grinned. Last time they tried to teach the cat tricks, we found glitter in the vents for weeks. But Claire held her back. Listen. From upstairs came Marcus's laugh. Clear, unrestrained. Nothing like the careful silence they'd known before. Just a 10-year-old boy playing with his friend and his new kitten. No shadows lurking in his voice. Dr. Wilson set her purse down. How long has he been laughing like that? More and more lately, Claire said softly. Yesterday he asked if his friend Jason could come over after school. Actually asked without prompting. And the nightmares? Down to maybe one a week, Sarah reported. Emma says he uses the Walnut code, less too. Dr. Wilson nodded approvingly. And how's the school situation? His teachers say he's participating in class again, Claire beamed. He even volunteered for the science fair next month. Want to see his project plans? She pulled out a carefully drawn diagram of a habitat for Spider, the class's pet tarantula. Marcus had specifically asked to work with her, explaining to Dr. Wilson that spiders aren't scary when they're not in attics. More laughter drifted down, followed by thundering feet on the stairs. Marcus and Emma appeared. Shadow perched on Marcus's shoulder like a tiny gray parrot. She did a trick, Emma announced. Show them, Marcus. Marcus held up a toy mouse. Shadow immediately sat up straight, eyes locked on the target. Ready? He asked the kitten. When she meowed, he tossed the mouse gently. Shadow leaped, caught it midair, and brought it back to him proudly. Fetch! Emma exclaimed. Just like we practiced. The adults clapped, and Marcus's face lit up with pride. No flinching at the sudden noise, no checking for approval before smiling. Just pure, uncomplicated joy. Brunch is ready, Claire announced. Marcus, want to help set the tables? Can Shadow eat with us? She has her own food, Sarah reminded him. But she can sit with us. They settled around the table. Plates passed, syrup drizzled, conversation flowing easily. Shadow curled up in Marcus's lap, purring contentedly. Oh, Emma said between bites. Tell them about the school assembly. Marcus ducked his head, but he was smiling. I talked to some kids. About speaking up. About telling if someone's hurting them. Dr. Wilson set down her fork. That was very brave, Marcus. How did it feel? Scary at first. But then this little kid came up after and said I helped him tell about his uncle, who was hurting him. Marcus stroked Shadow's fur. So it was worth being scared. Sarah reached across the table, squeezing his hand. You've helped a lot of people by telling your story, Marcus. But you know you don't have to keep talking about it if you don't want to. I know. He looked around the table. At Emma, his almost sister. At Sarah, who'd believed him first. At Dr. Wilson, who'd helped him find his voice. At Claire, who'd never stopped looking for him. But I'm not alone anymore. And neither are they. After brunch, the kids took Shadow to the backyard to explore her new territory. The adults watched through the window as Marcus showed her the garden Claire had planted. Tomatoes and flowers and, at his request, catnip. Look how far he's come, Dr. Wilson said softly. From that scared little boy at the wedding to this. Making friends, helping others, healing. Claire wiped tears from her eyes. His mother would be so proud. She is, Sarah said firmly. Wherever she is, she knows her son is safe now. Free. Outside, Marcus had picked up Shadow to show her a butterfly. Emma was explaining something animatedly, making him laugh again. The morning sun wrapped around them like a protective embrace. chasing away the last lingering shadows of the attic. Inside Marcus's room, the walls held new memories, photos of happy days, drawings from therapy, notes from classmates. His stuffed dragon sat proudly on the bed, watching over a growing collection of books about courage and healing and hope. And on his desk, in a frame Emma had decorated, sat the words he'd written at the end of his victim impact statement. The attic door is closed forever. But I am not locked away anymore. I am here, I am safe, and I am free.